Hello, I'm Mr. Baffer. Today, I will share with you the stories of Noxus and the Noxian champions. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Enjoy. The Empire of Power and Conquest. Noxus is an empire where only the strong survive. Here, weakness is synonymous with death. Noxus is a powerful empire with a fearsome reputation. Those living beyond its borders see Noxus as a cruel and threatening nation, burning with the fire of territorial expansion. However, behind its warrior facade lies an unusual, inclusive societal structure, where the skills of its people are respected and developed. The Noxians, once a group of savage barbarian tribes, decided to strengthen themselves after attacks on their NT cities. Surrounded by threats on all sides, this pushed them into a struggle for survival. They have relentlessly attacked their enemies, expanding their borders year by year. This struggle for survival has made contemporary Noxians an extremely proud people who value power above all else. However, this power is not limited to physical strength. It can also manifest through intelligence, strategy, and skill. In Noxus, anyone who demonstrates success in their work can rise to high positions, regardless of their social class, origin, or financial status. Those who can wield magic are greatly respected for their special abilities and are specifically sought after to develop these talents for the benefit of the Empire. This is one of the fundamental reasons the Empire is strong and effective. Yet, despite Noxus's meritocratic ideal, established noble families still wield considerable power within the Empire. The presence of these families in significant state positions, acting in their own interests, creates deep unrest in society. This situation fosters a fear that Noxus's greatest enemies lie not outside, but within. Looking at Noxus's history, we cannot overlook the importance of internal conflicts and power struggles alongside the wealth and power brought by wars and conquests. The future of this empire is shaped not only on the battlefields, but also in palaces and political arenas. Although Noxus presents a harsh and cruel image from the outside, the dynamics and conflicts within make this society incredibly intriguing. Throughout history, Noxus continues its relentless struggle against both its enemies and the adversaries within. While this empire is known as a symbol of power, the deep stories and human experiences beneath it transform Noxus into a true legend. Noxus is not just an empire. It is an ideal that pushes the boundaries of power and will. Do you think it is more valuable to worship power or to share it? Ambessa, the matriarch of war. Born into one of the most powerful families in modern Noxus, Ambessa Medada was perhaps always destined for greatness. Her family was not counted among the old noble houses, yet they had gained immense respect and influence across the empire since its founding, and young Ambessa's first exposure to bloodshed came early. watching reckoners risk their lives for a chance at glory in the arenas. Though she was too young to know the thrill of battle herself, she studied every match and internalized every move. In the aftermath of the Battle of Hildenard, her father sent her to collect the blades of fallen soldiers. Though still a child, Ambessa never once averted her eyes from the death and carnage around her. And by the end of the day, she knew death was not something to be feared, but respected. Sacrifice was a noble thing. Greatness demanded it. The Medada family code, passed down through generations since their earliest days as traders on the Shiraman coast, espoused the virtues of both the desert fox and the fearsome wolf of legend. So it was no surprise that Ambessa would choose a soldier's life, carrying the memories of her childhood lessons with her always, holding others to the ideals of familial honor and decisive action. She was a proud daughter of the Medada-born warrior, soon enough a general in command of several warbands, and clearly one of her grandfather Menelik's favorites as patriarch. And yet, she was so much more a woman, a lover, and a mother. In her appetite for life, Ambessa experienced it all. But the moment she held her son Kino for the first time, she finally understood what it meant to devote herself to someone unconditionally. And with that came the potential for profound disappointment. While she loved him dearly, it was clear that Kino would never have the strength of a warrior in his heart. Not long after, Ambessa almost met her end in battle, defending her ancestral home of Rockrand, while pregnant with her daughter, Mel, as she lay among the bodies of her allies and foes alike. She drifted near death and experienced visions that she would speak of to few others in her lifetime. Whatever it was Ambessa had seen, it alloyed her resolve and ambition. She would bend the world to her will, so that any weakness in her children would not be something her enemies could exploit. From that moment, Ambessa's rise became almost meteoric. She led from the front in every battle, fearlessly staring death in the eye. And with every victory, she grew more resourceful, more daring, and more uncompromising. When old Menelik Medada finally passed, he named no heir from his deathbed, sending several branches of the family into a conflict of succession. But Ambessa knew they clawed at heir, for this was her destiny. She defeated her rivals and vowed to forge a legacy worthy of the Medada name, worthy of her own children's inheritance. As the new matriarch, Ambessa began to speak more often of her own personal mantra, "In all things, be the wolf." She would tolerate no weakness or dissent in those around her, lest that weakness spill over into her. She even sent her daughter Mel away to the distant city of Piltover. Years passed before Ambessa began to hear murmurs of a new and powerful invention, called Hextech, from the soft-spined idealists of Piltover, no less. Intrigued by the potential of such a discovery, Ambessa traveled to the Gilded City to visit her daughter, determined to find out if this technology could be used to leverage even more power for the Medada family. Briar, the restrained hunger. Near the end of his reign, Grand General Borum Darkwill entrusted the Black Rose and its many hemamancers with creating a new kind of living weapon. Unlike their previous experiments on the deceased, this would be a being born from and fueled by blood one, driven to hunt down targets without requiring the sustenance of food and water. And so Briar was born. Her creators wanted an assassin, but all she wanted was to eat, eat, eat. When her first mission ended in a frenzied, gory failure, the Black Rose decided that Briar was too dangerous to use, but too powerful to be destroyed. In order to control her, they devised a special pillory locked by a Himmelith gemstone to restrain her and focus her mind. Once shackled with the pillory, Briar, along with the rest of the Black Rose's living weapons, was quickly deployed during Jericho's Swain's coup against Darkwill. She was given a handler to help direct her, but when released from her pillory, Briar immediately devoured him and everyone near her, everyone but her target, Swain, who escaped while the living weapon fed upon friend and foe. After an arduous capture, Swain's guards managed to trigger Briar's pillory and restore her restraint, enabling them to transfer her to their holding facility. Alone in her cell, Briar could focus on nothing except her hunger. Though she couldn't die from starvation, the absence of fresh blood weakened her day by day. At first, she thought the chorus of crazed wails echoing round her room were her own starving thoughts, until she realized the sounds were drifting in from unseen neighbors. Did Swain's forces manage to capture other living weapons during the coup? Was she locked up with them now, each having failed their mission, their purpose? The voices cried out for blood, sentiment Briar could relate to. But what she couldn't stand wasn't how often they did it, nor how loud they were, but that it was all they talked about. Their unrelenting hemomania was the most boring thing she had ever experienced. As hungry as Briar wasn't, she was hungry. Her thoughts stayed focused on the pitiful sounds of the others. What if she managed to break out of the pillory? Would her frenzy make her even more unhinged than her neighbors? Would she become as single-minded and boring as them? The idea was too horrifying to dwell on, so she instead resigned herself to listless solitude. Years passed, and the time alone allowed Briar to reflect on herself and consider the possibilities of the world outside her cell. Entertainment consisted of eavesdropping on the guards' conversations, devising new ways to pester them for raw meat, and agonizing over whether she should race her pet spiders or eat them. By chance, while she was toying with her pillory one day, she inadvertently loosened the Himmelith, which settled into a position just short of unlocking the restraint. Briar froze as thoughts of her hemomaniacal neighbors filled her heads. That what she'd become. But then she realized something. Being under control was just as dangerous as being out of control. She wanted to strike the balance. Having discovered the Himmelith's mechanism, Briar devised a plan. By this point, the guards were so used to her calls for attention that when she lured one close to her cell, nobody noticed he was missing until it was too late. The guard's blood surged within her, lighting a fire that had been waiting to spread. Briar was finally free. Now the living weapon gleefully roams the streets of Noxus, pillory locked back in place until she wants to unlock it. as she acclimates to the world outside, with the Black Rose monitoring the unexpected development. Briar eagerly learns all she can, making new friends and discoveries in a world she is starving to experience. Cassiopeia, the Serpent's Embrace. The youngest child of General du Couteau, Cassiopeia was born to a life of possibility and privilege among the Noxian noble houses. From an early age, she displayed a keen mind and sharp wit, and while her sister Katarina flourished under their father's tutelage, it was their mother, Soriana, in whose footsteps Cassiopeia would follow. A hero of Noxus' expansion into Shurima, General du Couteau eventually sent for his family, installing them close to the governor of the coastal city of Urzos. Surrounded by strangers in an unfamiliar land, Cassiopeia remained close to her mother, learning much of politics, diplomacy, and subtle influence. As she grew, Cassiopeia could not help but glimpse other hidden concerns within Soriana, beyond those of the Empire. One day, quite unexpectedly, Soriana collapsed in the family residence. Her hairbrush had been laced with caustic venoms by an unknown hand, leaving her close to death. General du Couteau was well versed in the ways of an assassin, and so he had all the household staff removed, leaving his wife and daughters alone in an empty house. Still little more than a child, Cassiopeia never left her mother's bedside. While Serena's recovery took many months, the bond between them became stronger than ever before. When the general was recalled to Noxus to prepare for the long-awaited invasion of Ionia, he took Katarina with him, but Cassiopeia remained in Urzos. Seemingly relieved, Soriana confided in her daughter that she belonged to a clandestine and secretive cabal, known by some as the Black Rose. Having guided the Empire for centuries, they had finally managed to spread their influence into Shurima. Now free of her husband's watchful eye, Serena's real work could begin. In time, and under her mother's tutelage, Cassiopeia blossomed into a young woman of tremendous beauty, cunning, and intelligence, if somewhat lacking in empathy. She saw those around her as tools to be used to achieve her goals, and then cast aside just as quickly. Though she had barely reached the cusp of womanhood, she was initiated into the Black Rose by hunting down and eliminating those who had sought the death of her mother. She surprised even Soriana with her speed and efficiency, and left no trace of her activities or her proxies behind. Only then was Cassiopeia made privy to the cabal's broader plan for Shurima. Using her family's tremendous resources, she undertook a number of expeditions into the deep desert, raiding ancient ruins with the help of a local mercenary named Sion. Her efforts were made all the more urgent when word reached Urzos from the capital. Grand General Boron Darkwill had been deposed by Jericho's swain, and a number of noble houses had chosen to honor his coup, including du Couteau. Outraged and disgusted by her husband's betrayal, and fearing that all members of the Black Rose were now in jeopardy, Soriana became desperate. She dispatched Cassiopeia to seek out the godlike power that had been the key to Shurima's supremacy in ages past. Cassiopeia swore she would return with a weapon ready for the looming secret war, or not at all. fulfilling this oath would leave her changed forever. Upon unearthing her long-lost tomb of the mythical Ascended, she knew this was the threshold to the power she sought, and intended to dispatch all witnesses from her expedition before claiming it. The guide Sivir was the first to fall to Cassiopeia's blade, but then an ancient stone tomb guardian reared up and buried its fangs into her flesh. Overcome by its arcane toxins, she was carried back through the desert by her hired soldiers, screaming as her body twisted into something new and unspeakable. Cassiopeia locked herself in the disused crypt of the Urza's residence, and endured the untold agonies of this transformation. Gone was the brilliant and beautiful daughter of Soriana Ducatos, replaced by a monstrous, slithering creature that skulked in the shadows, spitting poison and crushing stone as easily as glass. For weeks she wept and howled, grieving her lost life, until the day she could weep no more. She dragged herself up from the depths of despair, determined to accept maybe even someday embrace her fate. It was not the ascension she had hoped for, but Cassiopeia had unearthed the magic of dead Shuramar gods. She would turn it to the schemes of the Black Rose, just as she and her mother had planned, and she could feel this power growing within her, day by day, though into what even she cannot guess. Darius, the Hand of Noxus. Darius and his brother Draven grew up as orphans in the port city of Basel. Darius struggled to provide for them both, constantly fighting with gangs of older urchins and anyone else who threatened his little brother, even the city guard. Every day on the streets was a battle for survival, and Darius earned more scars by his 12th summer than some soldiers do in a lifetime. After Basilic was seized by the expanding Noxian Empire, the victorious commander Cyrus saw the strength in these defiant brothers, and they found a home within the ranks of his war host. Over the years, they fought in many grueling campaigns of conquest, from one end of the known world to the other, as well as crushing a number of rebellions against the throne. Within the Empire, anyone could rise to power, no matter their birth, culture, or background, and none embraced this ideal more fervently than Darius. From humble beginnings, he rose steadily through the ranks, always putting duty before all else, and garnering great respect for his aggression, discipline, and refusal to ever take a backward step. On the blood-soaked fields of Dalamore Plain, he even beheaded a Noxian general after the coward ordered a retreat, roaring in defiance and hefting his bloodied axe overhead. Darius rallied the scattered warbands and won a great and unexpected victory against a far more numerous foe. He was rewarded with a senior command of his own, attracting many thousands of eager recruits from across the Empire. Darius turned the majority away, accepting only the strongest, the most disciplined and iron-willed. Such was his fearsome notoriety, even in the lands beyond Noxus, that it was not uncommon for entire cities to surrender at the first sight of his banners, after a grinding victory against the cloud fortresses of the Varidi. A proud warrior people who had resisted decades of Noxian aggression. Darius was named the Hand of Noxus by Emperor Borum Darkwill himself. Those who knew Darius best knew he craved neither power nor adulation. He wished merely to see. Noxus' triumph over also Darkwill ordered him and his war hosts far north into the Freljin to finally bring the barbarian tribes to heel. The campaign dragged on for years, ending in a bitter, icy stalemate. Darius narrowly survived assassination attempts, ambushes, and even capture by the vicious Winter's Claw. He was growing weary of endless wars of attrition and returned to Noxus to demand a reconsolidation of the military. He marched his veterans into the capital, only to find that the Emperor was dead, killed in a coup led by Jericho's swain. The act had been supported by many allies, including Darius's own brother, Draven. This was a difficult position. As Han, many of the noble houses would expect Darius to avenge Darkwill, but he had known and greatly respected the disgraced General Swain, and had spoken against his discharge after the botched offensive in Ionia some years earlier. The oaths of the Hand were to Noxus, not any particular ruler, and Swain was a man who spoke honestly of his new vision for the Empire. Darius realized this was a leader he was prepared to follow, but Swain had other ideas. With the establishment of the Triferex, 3 individuals would rule Noxus together, each embodying one principle of strength, vision, might, and guile. Darius gladly accepted his place on this council and pledged to raise a new elite force, the Triferian Legion, the most loyal and prestigious warriors the Empire could produce, and lead the armies of Noxus into a glorious new age of conquest. Draven, the glorious executioner. Even as an orphan on the streets of Basilic, Draven was headstrong and full of bravado, frequently getting into vicious brawls with older street children and shady underworld thugs. While supremely confident in his own ability, some would say, overconfident Tit is unlikely he would have survived childhood had it not been for his older brother, Darius, who invariably finished the fights Draven started. When Basilic fell to the war hosts of Noxus, the brothers came to the attention of a captain named Cyrus, after Draven made an ill-considered attempt on his life. Impressed with their fighting spirit, Cyrus allowed them to join the Noxian ranks. For years, the brothers fought as part of Cyrus' war-hosted, while Darius took to this life easily. Draven grew steadily more bored. His martial skill was beyond question, but the daily drudgery of soldiering felt like too much effort for too little reward, and not enough personal glory. Darius inevitably rose to command his own warband, and Draven joined him. However, if he thought that would be easier, or a way to achieve greater individual recognition, he was sorely disappointed. Some say Draven chose to leave Darius' command. Some say he was forced out. Either way, his skills were highly sought after as a champion and duelist, and he was enticed to join a succession of warbands during the occupation of Ionia, before ending up with a fairly respectable contract in the Reckoning Pits. For centuries, the gladiatorial reckoners had performed a vital role in Noxus punishing criminals and settling disputes between the noble houses, and Draven was determined to receive the riches, adoration, and renown he felt he deserved. However, with long, protracted wars on many fronts, the spectacle was beginning to lose its appeal for the common citizen. As the attention of the crowds drifted, Draven fell into a slump, spending more and more time in the seedier drinking halls and gambling dens of the capital. He was washed up and broke when the former General Jericho Swain found him. Swain had a plan to reclaim Nox's lost glory and needed Draven's help to achieve it. Perhaps Swain only enlisted him as a way to ensure his brother Darius' support after the fact. Regardless, Draven proved integral to Swain's plan to depose the Grand General himself, Orin Darkwill. Standing triumphant with Swain, Draven smiled for the first time in months as the cheers of the Noxian people washed over him. But duty called. In the days and weeks following this unprecedented coup, many among the noble elite refused to honor Swain's succession, so they were sentenced to death in the arena. One condemned man escaped his handlers ahead of his execution, operating on pure instinct, as was ever his wont. Riven leaped from the high balcony and hurled a pair of axes at the fleeing man, cutting him down in a heartbeat. After a moment of stunned silence, the crowd roared their approval. Draven retrieved his axes, spinning them high in the air, playing to his new fans, and savoring their rapturous applause. Thus, Draven became the glorious executioner, turning routine bouts into grand spectacles that drew ever larger crowds. Soon enough, an enterprising and diminutive promoter, tired of paying to house, feed, and train reckoners only for them to die in front of dwindling audiences, approached Draven with an idea. What if the drama of the classic pit fights could be combined with Draven's natural showmanship? The reckoners quickly became entertainers as much as combatants, each with their own carefully constructed backstory, fighting style, and flamboyant personality. The fights were often bloody. This was still Noxus, after all, but far less often ended in death. The rivalries, trash-talking, and intrigue between the best-known reckoners became the stuff of legend throughout the Empire. But none were talked about more than Draven. For a time he lived the high life, receiving invitations to a never-ending stream of parties and banquets, mixing with the wealthy and influential of Swain's new Noxus. He even reconciled with Darius, and would occasionally still march out with the war hosts, defeating enemy champions and generals in single combat. Nevertheless, Draven has started to grow restless once again. He has all that he could have ever imagined, and more, but now dreams of the day when the whole world knows his name. Katarina, the sinister blade, born to one of the most respected noble families of Noxus. Katarina du Couteau found herself elevated above others from an early age, while her younger sister Cassiopeia took after their politically brilliant mother. Katarina was very much her father's daughter, and the wily General du Couteau pushed her to learn the way of the blade. To cut away the Empire's enemies, not with reckless brutality, but deadly precision. He was a harsh teacher with many pupils, and notoriously difficult to impress. So it was that Katarina's childhood had little room for kindness or rest. She spent every waking moment honing herself into the ultimate weapon, testing her endurance, her dexterity, her tolerance for pain. She stole poisons from the city's least reputable apothecaries, testing their efficacy in tiny increments upon herself, gradually building her resistance. Even as she catalogued their effects, she scaled the tallest towers in the dead of night, unseen by anyone. She yearned to do her part for Noxus. She yearned for the opportunity to demonstrate her hidden strengths in service of the Empire and the throne. Her first mark came straight from her father, camped with his war bands, on the eve of one of the military's innumerable westward invasions. She was to assassinate a line officer of the opposing army, a low-born wretch by the name of Demetrius. Katarina was livid. She hadn't trained her entire life to have her talents wasted on some dung-heel, barely skilled enough to swing a sword. He simply wouldn't do. Instead of her assigned target, Katarina stole into the enemy camp and slit the enemy commander's throat as he slept. It was a flawless execution. It would bring a swift victory and glory to Noxus. It would make her father proud. At dawn, his face daubed with ashes, the vengeful hero Demetrius led a berserk charge into her father's encampment. Dozens of Noxian soldiers were slaughtered, along with the general's personal retinue. Katarina's father himself barely escaped with his life. He was furious beyond words, refusing even to look his daughter in the eye. She had shamed him and their family name. The greatest assassins do not seek recognition or glory, he reminded her. They do not expect to occupy a place of honor at their master's right hand. Overwhelmed, Katarina struck out into the wilderness, alone. She would complete her original mission. Demetrius would pay with his life. Even so, her mind swam. Could she ever forgive herself? How had she been so foolish? She was so distracted. She didn't see her attacker until he had nearly taken her eye out. For Katarina's failure, General du Couteau had sent another of his protégés after her. A nameless whelp dragged up from one of the lesser assassins' guilds. But even with blood streaming down her face, the years of rigorous training kicked in, and her blades were in her hands in an instant. 6 hours later, she tossed Demetrius's severed head at her father's feet. She told the general she had considered taking his head instead, but eventually decided, as much as she hated to admit it, that he had done the right thing in ordering her death. She had failed, not just as an assassin or as a daughter, but as a Noxian. And failure must have its consequences. She ran her fingers along the raw, deep gash over her left eye, and thought of the price others had paid for her arrogance. She knew she had lost her father's favor, and could never regain it. He would raise others in her place, simply to spite her. Still, she vowed to redeem herself, no matter the cost, to rededicate her talents to the Empire, and to become the sinister weapon she always intended to be. Kled, the cantankerous cavalier. Legends of the popular folk hero Kled can be traced back to the founding of Noxus, and perhaps even further still. He is an icon revered by the common soldiery, which is increasingly a cause of concern to their commanders. For there are some among the war hosts who claim to have literally served beside him. Tall tales such as the Great Hussar's victory, the return of the High General Marshal Sergeant, and the Mountain Admiral abound, which strongly imply Kled has fought in every campaign ever waged, acquired every military title, and never once backed down from a fight. Though the details are often outlandish and contradictory, the essence of the tale remains. Charging into battle on his untrusty steed, Kled fights to protect what's his, and takes whatever else he can get. In truth, the cantankerous cavalier hails from another land entirely, Bandle City. As a Yordle, he made his home among the proud Noxy tribes in the wake of the Rune Wars, and has never looked back. The earliest mention of Kled in historical records was at the First Battle of Draven. In the dusty hills of those Badlands, the war host of General Draven was on the run from barbarian foes. Having lost the previous 2 engagements, morale was low. The supply train had been abandoned in the rout, and they were a week's march from the nearest outpost. Draven, in his spotless armor, seemed more concerned with how this would appear back home than the welfare of his soldiers, and ordered a defensive circle formation to buy himself time to think. Then, as the morning sun rose, the lone figure of Kled appeared on the hilltop, mounted upon a desert Drakelops. This warrior's weapon was rusted, his armor worn, his clothes tattered, but contempt and anger burned in his one good eye. He bellowed an ultimatum to the barbarian horde, demanding that they leave his lands or be destroyed. However, he did not wait for any response, spurring his steed and screaming the charge. Desperate, starving, and furious with their general, the Noxian war host's anger ignited at the sight of this act of bravado. They rushed after Kled as he tore into the enemy. What followed was one of the bloodiest melees ever fought on the northern steppes. The initial momentum of the counterattack was crushed beneath a hail of barbarian arrows from higher ground. But Kled fought on, even after he was thrown from his saddle and his Drakelops fled. He always seemed to be at the heart of the battle, chopping down foes, kicking out teeth, and biting faces. The bodies piled up around him, and his clothes were soaked with blood. He screamed louder challenges and cruder insults. Clearly, this great warrior was willing to die before ever backing down. Cowardice can be infectious, but so too can courage. Where the Noxians might have given up and fled for their lives, instead they were inspired to make one last stand. Even Kled's Drakelops returned and crashed into the barbarians' rearguard, snarling and clawing as it dived in to free its master. With his mount again beneath him, Kled became a veritable whirlwind of death, and it was the barbarians who broke and ran. Though too few of the Noxian soldiers survived that day for it to be considered a victory, Draven was contested long enough that word reached the immortal bastion, and reinforcements were sent. The war ground on for at least another decade, until the barbarian leaders sued for peace. Their strength was added to Noxus, and Draven became a foothold for continued campaigns across Dalamore and the north for many centuries to come. The body of General Zovenand, his fine armor, was never found. In time, countless other war hosts of the Empire acquired similar stories of Kled. It has long been said that he rides wherever Noxians march, claiming the spoils of war for himself. Indeed, in their wake, good humid signs can often be found proclaiming each new territory property of Kled. LeBlanc the Deceiver, matron of the Black Rose. LeBlanc's identity is as intangible as the whispers that describe her, as ephemeral as the illusions that give her shape. Perhaps it is unknown even to herself. After so many centuries of mimicry and deception, remnants of an order that has existed far longer than Noxus itself, initiates of the Black Rose have schemed from the shadows for centuries, drawing the rich and powerful to their ranks, though they do not often learn the origins of their matrons. Many have uncovered legends of a pale sorceress who aided the broken barbarian tribes in their struggle against the infamous Iron Revenant, subjugating lands already ravaged by the Darken. Even today, his name is whispered in fear. Mordekaiser, uniquely skilled among the Revenant's inner circle before she betrayed him. The sorceress pledged to neutralize the source of his power, the immortal Bastion, cutting him off from the well of death that fueled his nightmarish empire. Yet, even as the barbarians built an empire of their own in the Bastion's shadow, they failed to realize that the arcane secrets it held had not completely been locked away. The pale sorceress had always been gifted at illusion, and her greatest trick was to make Noxus forget the dark power roiling in its own heart. Before she was burned from the pages of history around the time of the Rune Wars, the Black Rose exists now to further the clandestine interests of those who can wield such magic. With its rank and file composed of mundane nobles, drawn to rumors of miracles, kept in thrall and ruthlessly exploited. Even the most powerful military commander could only ever serve the cult's true masters, as they fight one another for influence in games of intrigue and conquest, both in the Noxian capital and beyond its borders. For centuries, LeBlanc has served in secret as an advisor to foreign dignitaries, appearing in many nations at once, her illusions driving order into chaos. Rumors of a new matron rising with each generation only raise further questions. Which is the true version of herself? When she speaks, is it with her own voice? And what will the price be for the favor she offers? Borum Darkwill was but the latest to learn this last answer for himself. Though the Black Rose had aided his bid for the throne, he refused the counsel of their hand-picked advisors, requiring LeBlanc to take drastic measures, manipulating a young nobleman named Jericho Swain into revealing the cult's involvement. LeBlanc allowed herself to be executed along with the most prominent conspirators, or at least so it appeared. In time, she reached out to Darkwill herself, and found an increasingly paranoid ruler, fearful of his own mortality. After promising him the secrets to extend his life, LeBlanc slowly poisoned Darkwill's mind, even as she empowered him. Under his rule, the Noxian reverence of strength became something far more sinister, and together they ensured Swain's legend would end in disgrace on the battlefields of Ionia. But Swain, emboldened by forbidden lore from within the immortal bastion, did something wholly unexpected, managing to drag dark will from the throne and seize Noxus for himself. This new Grand General was not interested in his own legacy, but the glory of the Empire, and such a man could not so easily be corrupted. After countless centuries, LeBlanc wondered, had she finally found a worthy nemesis? Her actions have pushed Runeterra to the brink of all-out war many times. In the wake of desperate campaigns across the Freljord, on Targon's peaks, and deep in Shorama's deserts, the darkest magic has begun to spread once more, circling closer and closer to Noxus. Whether LeBlanc is still the same pale sorceress who betrayed the Iron Revenant, or merely one of countless hollow reflections, her influence clearly stems from ancient roots. The Black Rose has yet to truly bloom. Mordekaiser, the Iron Revenant. In a previous epoch, the fierce warlord Sanuzal rampaged across the northern wildlands. Driven by dark faith, he crushed every tribe and settlement in his path, forging an empire in blood and death. As his mortal life neared its end, he took great satisfaction in knowing he had doubtless earned a seat at the gods' table, in the glorious Hall of Bones, for all eternity. Yet, when he died, he found no halls or glory awaiting him. Instead, Sanuzal stood in an empty, grey wasteland, shrouded by ethereal fog and plagued by discordant whispers. Occasionally, other lost souls drifted nearby, little more than ghostly shapes, wandering their own personal oblivion. Anger consumed Sanuzal. Had his faith been false, or was his domination of the world simply not enough to grant him the immortality he craved? Surely this emptiness could not be all there was. Yet there seemed no end to it. He watched as the lesser spirits slowly faded into the fog, unmade and lost to time. But Sanuzal refused to fade. His will, tempered by rage and torment, held him together. Over time, the unknowable, disembodied whispering in that place crystallized into words he could almost comprehend. He learned was Oknan, a profane tongue, unspoken by any among the living. Slowly, a deceitful plan began to form in what was left of Samuel's mind. He began to whisper temptations across the veil between realms, promising his indomitable strength to any who dared listen. And, sure enough, the day came when a coven of sorcerers resolved to bring Sanuzal back from the dead. Lacking any flesh or bone, he spurred them to make him stronger than any mortal, binding his spirit form in dark metal plates wrought in the likeness of his old armor. So he rose, a hulking revenant of iron and hate. These power-hungry sorcerers had hoped to use him as a weapon in their trivial wars. Instead, he slew them where they stood, their weapons and magic useless against him. In desperation, they screamed out his name to bind him, but to no avail, for Sanuzal was no more. With an ethereal rumble, he spoke his spirit name in Oknon, Mordekaiser. Thus began his second conquest of the mortal realm. As before, his ambitions were great, only now empowered by necromantic sorceries he could never have previously imagined. From the fearful, dissipating souls of the sorcerers, Mordekaiser forged a weapon fit for an emperor of death, his brutal mace. Nightfallen seized control of the army they had raised. To his foes, it seemed he cared only for massacre and destruction. Entire generations perished under his relentless campaigns. However, there was far more to Mordekaiser's plan. He raised the immortal bastion at the center of his empire. While most assumed it was merely a seat of power, some came to know the secrets it held. Mordekaiser hungered for all the forbidden knowledge of spirits and death, and a true understanding of the realm, or realms beyond. Such tyranny could only bring him enemies. The Iron Revenant was defeated, surprisingly, by an alliance of the Noxus tribes, and betrayal from within his own inner circle. This hidden cabal managed to sever the anchors of his soul from his armor, and sealed the empty iron shell away in a secret place. And so, Mordekaiser was cast out of the material realm. However, unbeknownst to anyone, he had planned for this indeed. It was a pivotal part of his design. Domination and deceit had carried him far, but he knew that a destiny far grander than the Hall of Bones awaited him. There, in the once empty wasteland, all those who had died under his latest reign were waiting. Perverted by dark sorcery, their spirits would never fade. The strongest became his devout, eternal army, bound to his will. But even the weak were given purpose. From the subtle matter of their souls, Mordekaiser would forge a new empire. They would be the building blocks and mortar of his afterworld. Centuries have passed on Runeterra, and another empire has arisen around the immortal bastion. Mordekaiser's name is still whispered in fear and awe by those who study the old histories, and remembered unkindly by the few ancient souls who knew him. For them, the greatest terror would be for Mordekaiser to find his own way to return permanently. It is something they pray will not come to pass, for they know of no way to stop him. Rell, the Iron Maiden. Posters across Noxus warn of a dangerous criminal, armed with a massive, blunted spear, and born atop a magical fiend, whose mere existence poses a threat to the safety and security of the entire nation. Even some within the steeled ranks of the Trifarian Legion have begun to worry that they will be sent after her to their almost certain deaths. What kind of monster could be behind such heinous, unchecked destruction? The simple answer is a 16-year-old girl. The complicated one is unforgivable. Rell was special from the moment of her birth and fated to suffer for it. Born the daughter of a Noxian foot soldier and the heir to a fallen noble house, she enjoyed neither the trappings of wealth nor the gilded upbringing common to children of the lower aristocracy. Nevertheless, her parents had grand plans to mold her into someone who could shatter through Nox's dense political landscape. As Rell's mother always said, excellence is measured in sacrifice. Rell's unhappiness grew with time. sparking something unique within her magic, unlike anything seen in centuries. The ability to manipulate metal to Rell's parents. This was something to be exploited, for Rell's own sake, of course. And they tried unsuccessfully to apprentice her with many powerful mages who might whisk their daughter into the political or military elite. But someone else took notice of the young girl's magic, seeing in Rell a weapon who could one day face Noxus' most hated, ancient foe. A certain pale woman visited the family with a dark bargain. Rell soon found herself the star pupil of a very special academy, hidden far from the capital and away from the council's prying eyes. And though they rarely made appearances in her new boarding school, her mother and father never seemed more proud or more hopeful of their daughter's future. It seemed, at least for a moment, that perhaps Rell would be loved after all. Then the true horrors began. Rell was first forced into combat with another student when she was 8, and afterward, a kind of magic sigil was painfully grafted into her arm, amplifying her powers so that she could become even stronger. Yet, while this had been framed as a training exercise, Rell never saw the boy again. She never saw any of her opponents again. Every day, she grew more powerful, honing her magic for martial combat. Her body became covered with sigils that amplified her magical abilities to impossible heights. In time, she could rip a vein of raw ore from deep out of the ground, twist the walls into deadly weapons, and superheat an opponent's armor until it collapsed and crushed them. But her instructors desired even more from her all, in the hopes that Rell would be the most powerful soldier the Empire had ever known. On her 16th birthday, after a particularly barbaric duel, she'd finally had enough. Casting her instructors aside, Rell tore past the guards and ripped open the doors of a forbidden wing of the academy, discovering the true nature of her school. Every opponent she'd defeated had been nullified, their magic forcibly extracted from them and placed into the very sigils covering Rell's body and left as emotionless puppets devoid of memories. This was the price of her power, and she could never give it back. Worst of all was the headmistress who oversaw the procedures herself, Rell's own mother. All of this had been for Rell, she said. After all, excellence is measured in sacrifice. Rell raged. To the small handful of faculty who survived her escape from the academy, it was like the earth had been torn open into a twisting whirlwind of razor-sharp slag. The building ripped itself apart, forming an impenetrable suit of black armor around Rell as she crushed those who stood before her, flattening seasoned soldiers with a lance heavier than a mountain, bursting through the front gate on a steed made of rippling iron. She led as many of her classmates as she could to freedom leaving, the rows scrambling to recover the null and erase any trace of what their organization had done. But it was far too late. Soon enough, the surviving faculty members began to die in increasingly public ways, and the null could no longer be kept secret. Rell is now a threat to Noxus, but not in the way the handbills proclaim. She is a self-styled defender of the meek, full of unchecked fury, distrustful of everyone, and merciless toward a government that turned a blind eye to years of suffering and abuse. not because the Empire was personally responsible, but because they stood by and did nothing. Riding atop her iron steed, Rell's eyes are set on nothing less than the complete destruction of Noxus and saving any children who, like her, survived the Black Rose Academy. And there is nothing in this world that can stop her. Riven, the Exile. Built on perpetual conflict, Noxus has never had a shortage of war orphans. Her father lost to an unnamed battle, and her mother to the girl's own stubborn birth. Riven was raised on a farm run by the Empire on the rocky hillsides of Travail. Physical strength and ferocious will kept the children alive and working on the hard scrap of land. But Riven hungered for more than simply bread on the table. She watched conscriptors from regional warbands visiting the farms, year after year, and in them she saw a chance of the life she dreamed of. When she finally pledged the Empire her strength, she knew Noxus would embrace her as the daughter she longed to be. Riven proved a natural soldier. Young as she was, her years of hard labor allowed her to quickly master the weight of a longsword taller than herself. Her new family was forged in the heat of battle, and Riven saw her bond to her brothers and sisters in arms as unbreakable. So exceptional was her dedication to the Empire that Borum Darkwill himself recognized her with a runic blade of dark metal, enchanted by a pale sorceress within his court. The weapon was heavier than a kite shield, and nearly as broad, perfectly suited to Riven's tastes. Not long after, the war hosts set sail for Ionia as part of the long-planned Noxian invasion. As this new war dragged on, it became clear that Ionia would not kneel. Riven's unit was assigned to escort another warband, making its way through the embattled province of Navori. The warband's leader, Emistan, had employed a Zonite alchemist, eager to test a new kind of weapon. Across countless campaigns, Riven would gladly have given her life for Noxus. But now she saw something awry in these other soldiers, something that made her deeply uncomfortable. The fragile amphorae they carried on their wagons had no purpose on any battlefield she could imagine. The two warbands met increasingly fierce resistance, as if even the land itself sought to defy them. During a heavy rainstorm, with mud pouring down the hillsides, Riven and her warriors were stranded with their deadly cargo end. It was then that the Ionian fighters revealed themselves. Seeing the danger, Riven called to Emistan for support. The only answer she received was a flaming arrow, fired out from the ridgeline. And Riven understood this was no longer a war to expand the borders of Noxus. It was to be a complete annihilation of the enemy, no matter the cost. The wagon was hit straight on. Instinctively, Riven drew her sword, but it was too late to protect anyone but herself. Chemical fire burst from the ruptured containers, and screams filled the night, both Ionian and Noxian, falling victim to an agonizing, gruesome death. Shielded from the scorching, poisonous mists by the magic of her blade, she bore unwilling witness to scenes of horror and betrayal that would haunt her forever. Poor Riven, memories of the hours that followed come only in fragments and nightmares. She bound her wounds. She mourned the dead But most of all, she came to hate the sword that saved her life. The words carved into its surface mocked her, reminding her of all she had lost. She would find a way to break it, severing her last tie to Noxus before the dawn. But when the blade was finally shattered, still she found no peace. Stripped of the faith and conviction that had bolstered her entire life, Riven chose to exile herself, wandering Ionia's battle-scarred landscape. When she finally returned to the village where she had broken the sword, it was revealed that her self-destructive needs had cost the life of their most revered elder. And yet, Ionia embraced her with forgiveness. Noxus was not nearly so merciful. Although the Empire had long since withdrawn from the First Lands, it had not forgotten about Riven or her runic blade. After fighting fiercely against those sent to bring her to justice, she refused to let any more Ionian blood be shed on her account, and surrendered herself to the charges of desertion leveled against her. As she returns to Noxus in chains, Riven remains haunted. Though Darkwill is no more, and the Empire is rumored to have evolved, she is uncertain what will become of her, or whether she will ever be made whole again. Samira, the Desert Rose. In the city of Amakra, on the eastern edge of the Great Sigh, Samira and her parents made a living as street performers. They dazzled, beguiled, and awed onlookers, which thrilled Samira, but worried her parents. Despite the fun their daughter had, they wished she could enjoy a more stable life. But wishes are as fickle as the desert rain. On the eve of Samira's 14th birthday, armed strangers swarmed Amakra, hidden among the rafters of her home. Samira watched as the strangers invoked the name of an ancient magus and seized innocent villagers. Many people were slain before her eyes. Samira did not cry. She did not scream. Instead, she seethed in anger, not at the killers, but at herself for hiding. She had never felt crippled by fear before, even when she attempted the most daring stunts. In that moment, Samira hated herself and vowed never to feel so scared and helpless again. Though wounded, Samira and her parents escaped to Belgium, a port city under Noxian rule, with a handful of others. To the Amakrons, Noxus provided a safe haven. To Samira, Noxus opened a door, while other refugees found comfort in living quietly. Samira was determined to reclaim her courage. She took to the streets alone, since her parents, weary and injured, could not. Performing was no longer a job. It was her stage to be fearless. She outdid herself with every stunt, even when no one bothered to look. But it was still not enough to support her family. That was when Samira stumbled upon a call to join a Noxian warband. Drawn to the excitement and the financial resources it would provide, she enlisted. Her physical prowess amazed her peers. Deft with a blade and sharp with her aim, Samira reveled in her raw athleticism, excelling in combat, but faltering in discipline. After 2 years of training, her recklessness frustrated her commanding officers, save for one, Captain Indari, a former saboteur. Indari valued Samira's fearlessness and offered her a position in her private warband. a specialized unit charged with missions that were deemed too perilous for standard military personnel. Hungry for the dangers it promised, Samira agreed without hesitation. She fully embraced Noxian culture, finding her own strength and style amid life and death shootouts and breathtaking sword fights. In her free time, Samira regaled her family with stories of her tattoos, each representing only her most unforgettable feats. To her, what mattered most was challenging herself to turn danger into thrill, and thriving off the constant risk that made her feel truly alive. On orders from the capital, Indari's unit found themselves on the Rockrand Plains, sent to crush a secessionist uprising. As the warband located the enemy stronghold and approached the rebel leader, the fortress exploded. Samira dove headfirst into the chaos as the structure collapsed, permanently injuring her right eye. Feeling neither scared nor helpless, she wasted no time in recovering Indari, who had sustained a more serious injury. The captain could no longer move her legs. Indari, frustrated at her failure as their leader, disbanded the unit upon the return of its survivors. Discharged, and with no other opportunities rousing her interest, Samira drifted back home to Belgium. But it was no longer a lifestyle she could endure. Samira returned to the Noxian capital and located in Dari. She believed her former captain understood her craving for challenges in ways nobody else could, and wanted to make use of Indari's connections in the military and noble houses. She proposed they team up again in a new partnership where Indari could operate behind the scenes to find Samira high-stakes mercenary work. Reluctantly, Indari agreed, but it left her former protege alone with no field support, and Samira couldn't have been happier. She eagerly undertook missions meant for entire warbands and thrived. Her daredevil reputation spread far and wide, from beating a Kemberon in hand-to-hand combat to being the lone survivor of a Bilgewater raid. Samira completed every job, no matter the odds. With Indari's support, even the Noxian High Command accepted her, recognizing there was no one better suited to take on their most perilous missions. Now, Samira shows no signs of slowing down. She can be found scaling mountain cliffs one day and arm-wrestling outlaws in crowded taverns the next. But wherever she may be, one thing is certain. Samira never fails to find her next big thrill. Sion, the undead juggernaut. Over a century past, the brutal warlord Sion rose to prominence, slaughtering all who dared stand in his way. Greatly feared by friend and foe alike, he was the last of a proud warrior culture that had been part of Noxus since its founding. Sion had sworn oaths to his ancestors to never take a backward step in battle, and to die a proud warrior's death when his time came. While not noted for his subtlety or strategic acumen, Sion's methods were ruthlessly effective, and he won many vicious triumphs for Noxus. The Empire's might was at a peak not seen for hundreds of years, and so it took the generals of high command by surprise when a nation from the west first resisted, then began pushing back their steady advance. These Dalmatians drove the Noxian warbands eastward, harrying them back behind the walls of Hvardis. Sion, who had been campaigning in the Argent Mountains, now turned south, filled with fury. He arrived at the city to find the Dalmatians on the horizon. They had no intention of besieging Hvardis, having driven the Noxians from the lands neighboring their own. They were preparing to return home. Sion readied his troops, determined to punish these upstarts for their impudence. The Noxian commander at Vardis, however, had already suffered several defeats to the enemy, and was content to hide behind the city walls and let them leave unscathed. It had been Sion and his warriors who had paid the claim to the land, now lost in blood. Outraged, he hurled the commander from the city walls and ordered the attack. Sion tore straight through the Dalmatian lines, seeking out their leader king, Javan the First. But while his own warband charged with him, fearless of death, those who had been cowering in Vardis were weak. Their spirit broke, and they retreated back to the city, leaving Sion and his trusted few surrounded. One by one, they fell, but Sion plowed on. Belone, pierced by a dozen swords and a score of crossbow bolts, he finally reached Javan. The fight was brutal, and it was the Dalmatian who delivered the killing blow. Sion dropped his axe and, with a final burst of strength, tore the king's crown from his head with one hand, clamping the other around his throat. Javan's guards stabbed Sion again and again, but his grip did not loosen. Only when the enemy king was slain did Sion allow death to claim him. His body was recovered along with the Dalmatian king's crown. Still in his grip and borne back to the immortal bastion in honor, Noxus mourned Sion's passing, and his corpse was interred within a towering monument constructed to honor him for all time. Half a century passed before Sion's tomb was reopened. Noxian dominance had waned in the years since Sion's death, and the ruling Grand General of the Empire, Borum Darkwill, was willing to pay almost any price to restore its lost glory. Darkwill's allies, a mysterious cabal known as the Black Rose, reanimated the long-dead hero using forbidden magics and presented him to the Grand General. He could not refuse this gift, and so Sion returned to life, driven by unnatural bloodlust and utterly inured to pain. He hurled himself like a living battering ram against the enemies of Noxus, destroying all he faced. More so than before his death, the victories Sion brought were costly. He was uncontrollable, killing friend and foe without remorse, and those forced to fight alongside him began to desert. Finally, Darkwill ordered Sion reinterred. Hundreds of warriors died trying to restrain him, before he was finally bound in chains and dragged back to the immortal bastion. Without slaughter, the blood magic that sustained him quickly engulfed his mind in an all-consuming rage. His roars finally fell silent as he was sealed in beneath his giant statue. There he languished for many years, neither alive nor truly dead. When his tomb opened once more, it was to a very different empire. Darkwill was gone, overthrown by the General Jericho's swain. Sion cared little, roaring and pulling against his bindings in a frenzy that could only be sated in battle. Chained within an iron cage, he returned to Vardis, which had broken away from Noxian rule under Darkwill's reign. Sion was the new Grand General's punishment for their rebellion. He butchered the defenders of Vardis and leveled the city, laughing as he ripped its towers apart with his bare hands. Other regions that had abandoned Noxus soon bent the knee, fearing the undead juggernaut would be unleashed upon them next. When harsh daylight floods his opening tomb, Sion now welcomes it, for with it comes the chance to shed his chains and sat his hunger for bloodshed, to briefly silence the screaming madness, drowning out all thought of rest. Sion remembers only fragments of his life, and less of the times since. But one truth has remained as stark as on the day of his death now, as then the world trembles before him. Swain, the Noxian Grand General, born into a patrician family, one of many to exist since the first walls were raised around Noxus. Jericho Swain seemed destined for a life of privilege. The noble houses had played a key role in Borum Darkwill's rise to power, stoking rhetoric that their proud heritage was the nation's greatest strength. However, many hungered for greater influence, plotting against Darkwill in a secret cabal united by nothing more than the symbol of a black rose. Uncovering their intrigue, Swain personally executed the most prominent conspirators. Among them were his own parents, whose whispers of a pale woman had first alerted him of the danger to Noxus, which he valued more than house or kin. They sought a power, a shapeless voice cackling in the darkness of the immortal bastion, something like a raven's call. For exposing the cabal, Swain was granted a commission in the Noxian army, far from anything he had ever known. There, he learned firsthand that the Empire was not strong because of Noxians, as he had believed, but because of the way it could unite all men, in spite of their origins. On the front lines, a foreign slave could be the equal of a highborn noble. But still, Swain found only darkness in the wake of each battle. Clouds of carrion crows. After securing the western borders, Swain's own reputation was secured in Shirima, where his forces raised countless Noxstone above the desert sands. Yet, in time, it became clear that greed was the sole purpose driving the Empire forward. Fighting wars on too many fronts, lusting over magical relics, the aging Borum Darkwill was clearly growing unhinged. When Noxus invaded Ionia, Darkwill began to move even more brazenly, retasking entire warbands to scour the land for anything rumored to extend a mortal lifespan. With Swain's forces depleted, it became nearly impossible to engage the enemy. Finally, at the Battle of the Placidium, after luring the local militia into what should have been a trap, Swain's war host was overrun. His veterans were routed, and Swain was gravely wounded, his knee shattered, Ionian blades cleaving through his left arm. As he lay on the verge of death, a raven approached to feed, and Swain felt an old, familiar darkness press upon him again. But he would not let it take him. He could not. Staring into the bird's eye, he saw reflections of the evil strangling the heart of Noxus. A black rose, be the pale woman, and her puppet emperor. Swain realized that he had not defeated the hidden cabal, and they had betrayed him to what should have been his death after seducing Darkwill, the man they failed to overthrow. All this was glimpsed, not in the mind of a raven, but something more. The power his parents had been seeking. The demonic eyes blazing in the dark. Cast out of the military for his failure, considered nothing more than a cripple, Swain set about uncovering what truly lay within the immortal Bastionan ancient entity, preying upon the dying and consuming their secrets, as it had attempted to consume his own. Swain stared into that darkness, seeing what even it could not, a way to wield it. Though his meticulous preparations took many years, Swain and his remaining allies seized control of Noxus in a single night. Physically restored by the demon, he crushed Darkwill in full view of his followers, leaving the throne shattered and empty. Swain's vision for the future of Noxus is one of strength through unity. He has pulled back the war hosts from Darkwill's unwinnable campaigns, and, with the establishment of the Triferix, ensured that no individual can rule unopposed. He embraces any who will pledge themselves to the Empire, even the Black Rose, though he knows, in secret, they still plot against him. Gathering knowledge as the demon did before him, Swain has foreseen far greater dangers lurking just beyond. However, many Noxians secretly wonder if the darkness they face will pale in comparison to the dark things Swain has done. The sacrifices are only beginning for the good of Noxus. Talon, the blade's shadow. Talon's earliest memories are the darkness of Nox's underground passages and the reassuring steel of a blade. He remembers no family, warmth, or kindness. Instead, the clink of stolen gold and the security of a wall at his back are all the kinship he has ever craved. Kept alive only by his quick wits and deft thievery, Talon scraped out a living in the seedy underbelly of Noxus. His mastery of the blade quickly marked him as a threat, and Noxian guilds sent assassins to him with a demand: join their ranks or be killed. He left the bodies of his pursuers dumped in Noxus moat as his response. The assassination attempts grew increasingly frequent until one assailant met, Talon blade for blade in a match of strength. To his surprise, Talon was disarmed and facing down his executioner's sword when the assassin revealed himself to be General Du Couteau. The general offered Talon the choice between death at his hand or life as an agent of the Noxian High Command. Talon chose life on the condition that his service was to Du Couteau alone, for the only type of orders he could respect were from one he could not defeat. Talon remained in the shadows, carrying out secret missions on Du Couteau's orders that took him from the frigid lands of the Frigid to the inner sanctums of Demacia itself. When the general vanished, Talon considered claiming his freedom, but he had gained immense respect for Du Couteau after years in his service. He became obsessed with tracking down the general's whereabouts and scours the land in search of those responsible for Du Kuto's disappearance. Vladimir, the Crimson Reaper, a master of ancient, forbidden sorcery. Vladimir is among the oldest enigmas of Noxus. He was present at the dawn of the Empire, and has since woven his influence deep into its foundations. But he remembers little of those days. His mind is mortal, and so most of his unnaturally extended life endures, not in his memory, but in his chronicles. History has lost track of Vladimir on many occasions, though its pages are littered with figures suspected to have been him. Legend once told of a prince in a kingdom threatened by the infamous Arcane, as their great war spilled into Valoran, with his father's crown at stake, and many more heirs ahead of him in the line of succession. The unfortunate youth was traded to the fallen god warriors as a hostage. Mortals were little more than cattle under the tyranny of the Arcane, their supremacy apparent in the sorceries they had conceived, the arts of crafting flesh and transmuting blood, granting them mastery over life itself. Believing himself above other mortal vassals, and therefore worthy of such power, Vladimir was the first of his kind permitted to study this terrifying magic. His devotion earned him a place of favor in his patron's war host, and the right to practice hemomancy and enforce the Arcane's will on lesser beings. Over time, the god warrior watched with amusement as Vladimir came to govern his subjects with as little mercy as the Arcane themselves. The fall of these cruel tyrants is, likewise, the stuff of legend. An account of it, written in the dead High Shuriman language, is kept hidden within the immortal bastion. It speculates that Vladimir's master was not imprisoned like so many of his kin, but instead died at the hands of his own war host. The few surviving mortals fled, taking what knowledge they had of blood magic with them. Unknown to all but Vladimir himself, it was he who struck the killing blow. Scarred, blinded, driven mad by the radiance of a Arcane's undoing, he absorbed enough power to renew flesh that was never meant to last beyond a mortal lifespan. And he has done this countless times since, through rituals too vile to speak of. At the height of Mordekaiser's dark reign, it was said that a mythic and bloodthirsty fiend haunted the coastal cliffs of eastern Valoran, demanding young lives and savage worship from the local tribes. Few were welcome in his lair, until the day a pale sorceress approached this barbarian god with an offer. The two feasted together as equals, weaving magic so dark that the wine at their table soured, and the roses withered, vibrant red turning to black. Thus began the pact between Vladimir and LeBlanc, rife with disputes and games of politics and war. Over the centuries, others joined them, powerful nobles, exalted masters of magic, and beings darker still. This cabal grew into the hidden power that would guide the throne of Noxus for more than 1,000 years, orchestrating many of the Empire's most ambitious campaigns. Uniquely among the leaders of the Black Rose, Vladimir has rarely limited himself to scheming from the shadows. In the past, he deigned to join the Noxian noble courts during the most interesting of times. only to fade into seclusion decades later. His extreme adjourned the atrocities his sorcery could wreak a well-kept secret. Even so, under Vladimir's tutelage, the art of hemomancy has found a place in the military of Noxus, and among scions of the old aristocracy. Among these diverse practitioners is the Crimson Circle, a youthful cult dedicated as much to Vladimir's personality as to blood magic itself. With the death of the previous Grand General and the rise of Jericho Swain, the political landscape of the Empire changed dramatically, and Vladimir has been forced to rouse himself once more. Wearing the guise of a benevolent socialite, he has returned to the public eye as a vocal opponent of the ruling Triferic's council, much to the concern of more cautious members of the Black Rose. Indeed, his reappearance may have come too soon, as time has not yet washed away all the stains of his previous lifetime. And it seems likely that Swain himself has begun to grasp Vladimir's true nature. As a new and darker conflict approaches Noxus, Vladimir drinks deeply from the renewed vitality of the Empire, reminding himself of his past glories. To him, this life is a mere revelry, a masquerade spanning centuries, and the prologue to greatness, for though the Darken eventually fought amongst themselves and lost their immortal grip on the world, Vladimir knows he is strongest alone.